The air in the living room was thick with the scent of pine needles and simmering ham, a potent cocktail of Christmas cheer and simmering resentment. Laughter, forced and brittle, punctuated the silence that stretched between my husband, Stephen, and his brother White. The tension crackled, invisible yet palpable, a constant hum beneath the surface of our forced familial merriment. Becky, my sister-in-law, flitted around the room like a nervous hummingbird, her eyes darting between Stephen and White, attempting to diffuse the mounting tension. She was a picture of anxious grace, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her smile plastered firmly in place. But I saw the tremor in her hand as she poured the wine, the way her eyes glazed over when Stephen made a particularly pointed remark about the stock market. Stephen, my husband of 10 years, sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the flickering television screen. He hadn't spoken to White in months. A silent war waged between the two brothers over a business deal gone sour. The animosity, once a simmering ember, had now erupted into a full-blown inferno, casting a long, ominous shadow over our family gatherings. I, meanwhile, found myself drawn to White. He sat across from me, his gaze contemplative, as he watched Becky navigate the social minefield she had created. His features, a stark contrast to Stephen's angularity, were softer, more expressive. His eyes, the colour of a stormy sea, held a depth that seemed to pull me in. I caught him watching me, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. A shiver, not entirely unpleasant, ran down my spine. I quickly averted my eyes, feeling a blush creep up my neck. This was wrong, dangerous. White was my brother-in-law, my husband's brother. But the familiar ache of dissatisfaction within my marriage, the stifling monotony of our routine, made the forbidden thrill of his attention all the more intoxicating. The years had bled the passion from our marriage. Stephen, consumed by his work, had become a stranger, a ghost who inhabited the same house but lived in a different world. Our conversations were reduced to mundane exchanges about groceries and bills, our physical intimacy a distant memory. A wave of longing washed over me, a yearning for something more, something beyond the predictable rhythm of our lives. White, with his brooding intensity and the unspoken promise of forbidden desire, offered a tantalizing escape, a glimpse into a world of passion and excitement. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room seemed to intensify. Becky, her attempts at reconciliation proving futile, retreated to the kitchen, leaving Stephen and White to their simmering resentment. I found myself drawn to White's side, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere. "This is unbearable," I murmured, my voice barely audible above the crackling fire in the hearth. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a sympathy that surprised me. "I know," he said, his voice low and husky. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," I said, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through me. "It's never been easy between you two." He leaned closer, his gaze intense, and for a fleeting moment the years melted away, the invisible barriers between us dissolving. I felt a spark ignite within me, a dangerous, exhilarating flicker of desire that I had long forgotten existed. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced conversation, awkward silences, and stolen glances. I felt White's gaze on me constantly, a silent conversation passing between us, a language of longing and unspoken desires. As the night wore on, the tension in the room seemed to reach a fever pitch. Stephen, fueled by a potent combination of resentment and alcohol, made a scathing remark about White's business ventures, igniting a furious argument. Becky, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, burst into tears. The festive atmosphere, already strained, shattered completely. In the ensuing chaos, I found myself alone with White, the rest of the family retreating to different corners of the room. His eyes, dark and stormy, met mine across the room. A silent message passed between us, a shared understanding of the suffocating atmosphere, the yearning for escape. He rose from his chair and moved towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears. This was wrong, I knew, utterly wrong. But as he drew closer, the forbidden thrill of the moment overwhelmed me. I felt a strange sense of liberation, a reckless abandon that I hadn't experienced in years. The years of stifled desires, the monotony of my marriage, seemed to fade away, replaced by a heady sense of anticipation. He stopped in front of me, his breath fanning my face. "Come," he whispered, his voice a low growl. I hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing my mind. But then, I took a step towards him, my hand reaching out to touch his chest. The moment the tips of my fingers brushed against his shirt, a jolt of electricity surged through me, igniting a fire within my soul. He pulled me towards him, his arms encircling me like a vice. The scent of his aftershave, a blend of sandalwood and something musky, filled my senses, intoxicating me. I felt a dizzying rush of sensations, a heady cocktail of fear and exhilaration. His lips met mine, a fierce, demanding kiss that stole my breath away. I gasped, my hands instinctively reaching for his hair, holding him closer. The kiss deepened, a passionate exploration that ignited a fire within me, a fire I thought had long been extinguished. He tasted of wine and Christmas spices, a tantalizing mix that sent shivers down my spine. I responded with a fervor that surprised even myself, my inhibitions melting away like snow under a summer sun. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine, a silent question hanging in the air. I nodded, unable to speak, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He took my hand, leading me towards the dimly lit hallway. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears. I was terrified, exhilarated, utterly lost in the intoxicating haze of forbidden desire. He pulled me into the guest room, a small, sparsely furnished room that smelled faintly of lavender. He pushed me gently onto the bed, his gaze never leaving mine. My breath hitched as he began to undress me, his touch gentle yet urgent. I felt a strange sense of detachment, watching him with a mixture of awe and trepidation. This was happening, I realized. This forbidden encounter that had been brewing within me for far too long. He shed his clothes, his body lean and muscular, a stark contrast to Stephen's more portly frame. I ran my hands over his chest, tracing the contours of his muscles, feeling a jolt of electricity with each touch. He leaned over me, his eyes burning with desire. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice a husky caress. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a shy smile gracing my lips. "You're not so bad yourself," I murmured back, my voice barely audible. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down my spine. Then he lowered himself onto me, his body fitting perfectly against mine. The sensations were overwhelming, a symphony of textures and temperatures. His skin, warm and smooth, against mine. The feel of his hands on my body, exploring, discovering. The way his lips moved against mine, a passionate dance of tongues. I had never experienced anything like it. The years of stifled desire, the monotony of my marriage, seemed to evaporate, replaced by a raw, primal intensity. He moved inside me, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. I gasped, my body arching involuntarily. A wave of pleasure washed over me, unfamiliar and exhilarating. He held me close, his body trembling with the force of his own release. I felt a strange sense of peace, a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. We lay there for a long time, our bodies intertwined, our breaths mingling. I felt a sense of euphoria, a feeling of liberation I had never known existed. He held me close, his arms wrapped around me protectively. "I've wanted you for so long," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He kissed the top of my head, his lips lingering for a moment. "We shouldn't have," he murmured, his voice laced with regret. I shook my head, burying my face in his chest. "I don't regret it," I whispered, the truth of my words washing over me. He held me tighter, as if afraid I might disappear. "I don't regret it either," he confessed, his voice a low growl. We lay there in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire downstairs. I felt a sense of peace, a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Suddenly I felt a sharp pang of guilt, a reminder of the betrayal I had committed. I pulled away from him, a wave of anxiety washing over me. "We have to be careful," I said, my voice trembling. "Stephen will notice." He nodded, his expression somber. "I know." I felt a pang of regret, a fear that this moment of passion would be fleeting, a forbidden indulgence that would soon be forgotten. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own desire, a shared understanding that this was more than just a fleeting encounter. We spent the rest of the night in a state of suspended animation, a delicate balance of passion and fear. We talked, whispered, and held each other close, savouring the afterglow of our encounter. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the window, we knew we had to leave. We dressed quickly, our movements clumsy with the lingering effects of our passion. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and regret. "I'll see you," he promised, his voice low and husky. I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned down and kissed me, a lingering, tender kiss that held the promise of more to come. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the silent room, the echoes of our passion still ringing in my ears. I felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a dangerous thrill that I couldn't deny. I had crossed a line, shattered the fragile facade of my marriage. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The rest of the Christmas holiday was a blur of forced smiles and awkward silences. I moved through the days in a haze, the memory of the night with white a constant, intoxicating presence in my mind. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant, insidious companion. I felt like a fraud, a hypocrite. I had betrayed my husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish. But the memory of White's touch, the raw, primal intensity of our encounter, overshadowed the guilt. I craved him, the thought of him a constant ache in my soul. Days turned into weeks, and the secret I carried within me began to feel like a suffocating weight. The guilt, once a distant hum, had grown into a deafening roar, threatening to consume me. I knew I couldn't live with the lie any longer. I had to confess, not just for Stephen's sake, but for my own sanity. One evening, as Stephen sat reading the newspaper, I sat opposite him, my heart pounding like a drum. "Stephen," I began, my voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from his newspaper, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Jennifer? You look like you've seen a ghost." I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I slept with White, on Christmas Eve." The newspaper slipped from his grasp, fluttering to the floor. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. You what?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, my eyes pleading for understanding. "I'm sorry, Stephen. I don't know what came over me." He rose from his chair, his face pale. "You slept with my brother?" he repeated, his voice a low growl. "Yes," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I know it was wrong. I'm so sorry." He paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. "After all these years, how could you?" "I don't know," I confessed, tears welling up in my eyes. I was unhappy. Our marriage, it's been so empty." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Empty? What about our son? What about our life together?" "I know," I sobbed. "I know, but it wasn't enough. I needed more." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding sadness. "I thought we had something," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought we were happy." "I thought so too," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But I was wrong." He turned away from me, his shoulders slumped. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what to do." The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of my betrayal hung heavy in the air, an oppressive force that threatened to suffocate us both. Over the next few weeks, we existed in a state of suspended animation. We spoke in clipped sentences, avoiding eye contact, the ghost of my betrayal hovering over us like a dark cloud. Stephen withdrew from me, his emotional distance a constant, painful reminder of my betrayal. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible, unwanted. But as the weeks turned into months, something began to shift. The initial shock and anger gave way to a quieter, more profound sadness. We started to talk, tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. We talked about our marriage, our disappointments, our dreams. We talked about our son, his future, his happiness. The process was painful, excruciatingly so. We relived the past, dissected our failures, and confronted the harsh realities of our broken marriage. I learned that my betrayal had shattered Stephen's trust, leaving him feeling lost and betrayed. He had loved me deeply, truly, and my actions had shattered that love into 1,000 pieces. I also learned that I had lost a part of myself, a part that had been buried beneath the weight of complacency and routine. The affair, for all its destructiveness, had awakened something within me, a sense of self-awareness, a desire to live a more authentic life. The road to recovery was long and arduous. There were days when I wanted to disappear, to escape the pain and the guilt. But Stephen, with his quiet strength and unwavering support, helped me navigate the treacherous waters of forgiveness and healing. We began to rebuild our lives piece by piece. We sought counselling, learning to communicate with honesty and empathy. We reconnected with each other, rediscovering the love that had been buried beneath the weight of resentment and disappointment. The process was not easy. There were setbacks, moments of despair and lingering doubts. But slowly, tentatively, we began to heal. The affair with White, a tempestuous storm that had threatened to destroy my marriage, ultimately became a catalyst for change. It forced me to confront the realities of my life, to acknowledge my own unhappiness, and to strive for a more fulfilling existence. My marriage, though forever altered, emerged stronger, more resilient. We learned to appreciate the fragility of love, the importance of communication, and the enduring power of forgiveness. Looking back, I realized that the affair, though a painful betrayal, was ultimately a turning point in my life. It forced me to confront my own demons, to acknowledge my own needs, and to strive for a more authentic and fulfilling life. I learned that life is unpredictable, that passion can ignite in the most unexpected places, and that the consequences of our actions can be both devastating and transformative. I learned that forgiveness, both given and received, is a powerful act of love, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. And I learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for healing, for growth, for a new beginning.